Our last session of the day will highlight the opportunities and risks associated with artificial intelligence and the future of our energy transition. So artificial intelligence, for those of you who don't know, is a rapidly evolving field that enables complex computers to analyze data, recognize patterns, and perform complex tasks with efficiency and adaptability. We've heard a lot today about AI as a driver of infrastructure demand, particularly energy and water, but some experts also believe that AI can invigorate efforts to meet our clean energy goals and cut costs for new energy infrastructure projects. So in a moment, you'll receive the last polling question of the day, asking your perspective on AI and the energy grid. Again, this question will be available throughout the session, so you can answer it now, or consider what our speakers have to say and then respond later. And then we'll take a look at those results before we close. We also expect some time for Q&A at the end, so be sure to submit your questions through the app. And now please join me in welcoming to the stage the first of two national speakers on this topic, Executive Director of the Center for Industrial Strategy, Charles Yang.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for the warm introduction, and thank you all for being here. Really excited to talk about the potential and the opportunity between AI and energy. Very briefly about the Center for Industrial Strategy, we're a new bipartisan think tank in Washington, D.C., focused on developing policies to build U.S. industrial power. Now, in a moment, I think you'll see why that relates to the topic that we're talking about here today. Okay, great. So I'm going to organize my talk into two halves. First, we'll talk about energy for AI, and then second, I'll talk about AI for energy. And I think I structured it this way because there is a lot of unique interwoven relationships between these two incredibly important trends. And I think it's worth unpacking how exactly they're related and the opportunities that both of them present. So first, energy for AI. Because, as you may have heard, there is a growing demand for power from these very large data centers. And as a result, a whole new cohort of people, including these very large tech companies, are suddenly very interested in the energy sector and starting to realize what I think has always been true, which is that energy is foundational for our economy. And we can see this when we look at how the grid has evolved over time. You might have heard recently, oh, we have a huge amount of power coming, and we have to grow our grid, and it's presented in this kind of a crisis scenario. But the reality is, the real anomaly is not that our grid suddenly needs to grow. The real anomaly is that actually for about the past 15 years, our grid has not been growing. There's a number of reasons for that, from the post-2008 slump to the utility use of demand response, where we shift power consumption to more efficiently use existing energy infrastructure. But the reality is the long historical trend of the US has been that our grid has been constantly growing at about 15% every decade, which is roughly the same amount that experts are currently forecasting today. And so when we look at data center demand and other drivers of demand, which I'll talk about in a second, this should not be something that is wholly new or surprising, but rather a return to the original trend, which we have really been knocked off of for the past 15 years. But what this pause over the past 15 years has allowed is the accumulation of process and procedure that was not designed for a grid that needed to grow. And so that is going to pose several challenges, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, energy is foundational for our economy. It's not just relevant for data centers, but for our broader economic growth. And just to kind of highlight that point, I want to bring up two projects, both in North Carolina. One, the Carolina Lithium Plant in Gaston County, and the other, the Boviet Solar Plant in Pitt County. Both are in the eastern part of the state, I believe. And they both draw tens of megawatts of power. And just for context, 10 megawatts is about the same power usage as 5,000 homes. And this is roughly similar to the same amount of power that a medium-scale data center would use. And so it's not just power for data centers, but it's power for the kinds of industrial and manufacturing sectors which have received a lot of national attention recently, but which more importantly also anchor communities and provide good-paying jobs in states like North Carolina. And so solving this energy problem for data centers is not just solving a question that is relevant to tech companies, but is a question that's broader for anyone who is thinking about regional economic development and strong communities. Now, the problem, as I think we might have sensed, is that the grid is not working as it's supposed to. Just to illustrate that, the line to plug power into the grid has been getting longer and longer. And from this current graph, the current line to plug power into the grid, or what we call the interconnection queue, has 2.5 times the proposed projects as the total power capacity of the entire US grid. Now, not all of those projects are real, because developers, when they find that the line is taking too long, they will propose projects in multiple different areas. But I think it's illustrative of the fact that the current way that we operate and plan for the grid is increasingly becoming inadequate or insufficient for the changing world that we live in. Now, how do we address that problem? I think data centers can actually lead the way, because these data centers are developed and funded by, frankly, some of the world's wealthiest companies. And now they are very interested in creating new sources of power to power these data centers. And so these are just a subset of the deals that some of these companies like Google and Meta and Amazon and Microsoft have signed with energy developers in all of these key areas, from nuclear to geothermal to hydropower. And this is important not just for their needs, but also because they are helping support emerging energy industries, from small modular reactors in nuclear to enhanced geothermal. These are all emerging energy technologies and innovations that the US has an opportunity to lead in, and these data centers are providing the demand and the capital to help finance these projects. Just as another example of the kind of energy innovation that is happening in which data centers are starting to tap into, we've heard a lot about microgrids today, which is using solar and batteries to be able to take certain communities, rural communities, to power themselves independently. That same concept can actually be applied to data centers as well, where data centers can actually go off-grid with solar and battery storage with some natural gas backup. And what this graph is illustrating from a recent study that Stripe and a few other partners did is that data center developers can actually plug in power using microgrids faster than existing interconnection processes. So this is just another example of how data centers can actually leverage new energy innovation and energy technologies to meet their needs, but are helping de-risk energy technologies for the broader portfolio of our economy. Just another example, another North Carolina example to highlight, Duke Energy announced a new kind of energy agreement between Amazon, Google, Microsoft, as well as Nucor, which is a large steel producer in the US. This agreement allows them to move more quickly to secure power by paying for their fair share of the cost and meeting their own clean energy commitments. I think these agreements like this are a good example of how regulatory innovation, utilities, and technology companies, as well as other manufacturing industries like Nucor, can work together to leverage energy innovation to meet their own demands, but also meet their broader clean energy commitments. But the trick, of course, is that it has to be done right, with the correct and appropriate amount of stakeholder input, and ensuring that ratepayers are not being burdened with the cost of these energy developments. And so this announcement, I think, is still in the preliminary works. There hasn't been much more since this press release, but it's a good example, I think, of the pathway to actually executing some of these projects and how we can leverage the demand for energy from AI to de-risk energy innovation and support broader energy deployment. Now I want to talk a little bit about how AI actually relates to energy, or AI for energy. Because while AI is a large demand driver for load growth and power consumption, it might actually be the technology that helps us meet the very problem it creates. So I'm going to highlight just three brief examples of how AI can be used to help us with our energy burdens. So the first is AI can actually be used to help accelerate and expedite environmental permitting reviews and processes to shorten timelines for environmental reviews and permits. So this is one project that Pacific Northwest National Lab under the Department of Energy launched last year called Policy AI, that is developing AI models that can support environmental permitting reviewers. This is, I should also add, a bipartisan initiative that was launched a year ago under the Biden administration, but was recently affirmed in a Trump executive order on using artificial intelligence to support environmental reviews to expedite energy projects. And to be clear, this is not meant to automate or place sign-offs or approvals in the hands of AI, but rather to leverage these kinds of technologies to help environmental permit reviewers at the federal and state level be able to work through the vast amounts of information they have to process more quickly and efficiently. Another example is solving that very problem I brought up at the beginning around interconnection and the queue or the line that developers have to wait in order to plug power into the grid. This is another Department of Energy initiative of providing funding to leverage AI to support demonstration projects of how AI and grid operators can work together to speed up the process to plug in new power into the grid. In particular, this kind of work is focused on the modeling of our grid. How do we ensure that new sources of power generation are plugged into the grid safely and securely? That requires a lot of very computational and intensive modeling and engineering work that AI can have the potential to help accelerate and promote. Finally, and more speculatively, AI can also be used by grid operators to help them better understand the dynamics of the grid, help them operate and deal with increasingly large amounts of information that are coming from connected energy resources, from smart EV charging to smart thermostats. AI can help grid operators deal with this massive influx of information that they're dealing with. So I raise all of this because these two trends that we're seeing, the development and growth of AI and the energy sector, and particularly the energy demands of AI, are actually intimately related. And as I think we can all sense, there is a lot of churn happening, both in the rapid pace of innovation in both of these fields, and also in terms of policy factors that can affect the deployment of both of these technologies. But my perspective has always been that times of change are really times of opportunity. And there is, I think, tremendous opportunity for states and communities to leverage this moment to support their local communities, by bringing in economic development, by accelerating energy deployment that supports broader economic growth. So with that, I'm very excited to be here and happy to take questions after our next speaker.
All right, Charles, thank you so much. We'll see you in just a moment. And thanks so much for highlighting some of those potential opportunities. Our next presenter is IBM Consulting's global leader for responsible AI. She's no stranger to the Emerging Issues Forum. Please welcome Phaedra Boinodiris, please.
Yes, as you heard from Charles, absolutely AI could help lower your energy bill via a smarter grid, predicting power surges before they drive up costs, making homes more efficient, and ensure clean energy benefits everyone, not just the wealthy. But here's the challenge. Some forms of AI demand massive energy, with some data centers consuming as much power as entire cities. AI-powered grids face far more cybersecurity threats than traditional systems. AI could deepen energy inequality if it's not designed with fairness. Wealthy areas will get the benefits first. Are energy companies ready to be accountable to ensure responsible outcomes from these AI models? Do they know what it will take? This is our crossroads. AI can make energy affordable and fair, or it could potentially widen the gap if it is not responsibly curated. There is good news. There is good news in terms of innovations with respect to AI efficiency. First of all, there's a growing trend to adopt and embrace smaller models, which requires less energy in order to perform. Additionally, here at NC State, there's a lot of research being done to benefit the hardware advancements in particular. Now, even with the best of intentions, there are organizations that can end up causing harm with respect to AI. And you don't have to look far. Just look at the news. For example, the state of Michigan, they had procured an AI model to predict welfare fraud. It ran for a period of 3 years with an accuracy score of less than 10%. So you had families being dragged into court and erroneously fined. And people knew about the low accuracy, and there was low or no accountability. Additionally, does anybody here know which US federal government agency was the catalyst for former President Biden's executive mandate, executive order on the subject of AI? Does anybody know the catalyst? Which government agency was the catalyst? Shout it out if you know it. An audit was done on the IRS and the use of their algorithms, their AI. And the audit found that there was unfair outcomes from the use of those particular AI models, which is why President Biden mandated an executive order stating that all US federal government agencies need to audit their models in order to be able to know their outcomes. With predictive AI, this is well before generative AI, We have traditional predictive models, NLP. There are all kinds of challenges, all kinds of risks which have been documented, like unfair outcomes, inaccurate outcomes, et cetera. With generative AI, they introduced totally new risks and amplified those risks, right? Including hallucinations, as an example, or spewing toxic hate speech, data poisoning attacks. Now with agentic AI, which you might be familiar with, this is when you've got one AI model whose outputs are being used as the inputs for another AI model in a series in order to take over an entire workflow. This is introducing yet new net risks. What does it take to earn trust in these models? Depending on which analyst group you believe, between 75% to 85% of investments in AI get stuck in proof of concept. Their return on investment are not realized, and this is for 3 core reasons. One is the initial investment was not appropriately tied to the business strategy. 2 is that people don't trust the AI, or they're overly trusting of the AI. And the 3rd reason is a lack of skills. So it's very, very important to step back and think about what does it take in order to make sure each of these 3 things are addressed. Starting with, again, thinking about what does it take to earn trust. Are these models fair? Are they explainable? Are we being transparent with respect to what data was used to train them? Does it maintain data privacy? Are they robust against adversaries? What I'm describing to you is not strictly a technical challenge with a technical solution, but one that is socio-technical. And being a socio-technical challenge, it really requires a holistic approach. You need to be thinking about what is the right organizational culture required to curate AI responsibly, which are those AI governance processes, and the right tools and AI engineering frameworks. And of those 3, can you guess which one is the hardest? One, people. People, organizational culture, it is the hardest. Why? Because you can't have trust unless you have accountability. When I ask large audiences the question, who in your organization is accountable for responsible outcomes from AI, the top 3 answers I get are terrible. First answer I get, top answer I get is no one, overtly terrible. The second common answer I get is we don't use AI, which is laughable. It's already embedded in the licenses you already bought, plus there's shadow AI. And the 3rd answer I commonly get, which sounds the most noble, but is also concerning, is the answer everyone. Because indeed, everybody who touches an AI across the entire AI lifecycle is in some way accountable. This is totally true. But if everybody is being held accountable for establishing the safeguard rails, establishing governance, is anyone accountable? And the answer is no. Right? No one is accountable. If you say everyone is accountable, and no one is actually accountable, because you have to recognize it takes a lot of work to build AI in a way that is trusted, that earns our trust. Here's what those who are responsible for establishing governance or safeguard rails, here's what their job is. They have to get value alignment within their organization, meaning they have to get all their senior leaders to agree why this is so critically important to do, that this is table stakes, right? The second thing they have to do is they have to keep track of their AI model inventory, because you can't govern what you can't see, right? You have to know how to audit these models to make sure they're performing in the way that it's intended to behave. You have to keep track of the regulatory landscape, which is always changing. But you have to recognize you can have AI be lawful but awful, which means you have to push into ethics. And as soon as you push into ethics, you have to be a great teacher, because you have to be teaching people not just building AI on your behalf, how to do so in a way that aligns with your organization's ethics, but also those who are buying models on your behalf, how to do so, right? So these people are often, they're responsible for whole AI literacy programs, not just teaching people how to use AI to be more productive in their jobs, but how to be accountable, or even how to hold their vendors contractually accountable for AI, much less also how to build, how to maintain, and how to govern these models. It's a lot of work, which is why what I'd urge you to consider is think about and research what other states have been doing with respect to standing up centers of excellence for responsible AI. And this has been across blue and red states. We've seen this now in Texas, New York, California, Connecticut. And what this is a coalition between government agencies, private industry, academic institutions, and nonprofits coming together to do three core things. One is to influence the use of AI, or public policy, in particular with respect to AI. The second is to influence how do we teach this in schools in a way that is holistic, in the way that I just described, including accountability, right? That it is a socio-technical challenge. But then also being able to detail and communicate, like, what are best practices for industries that are important to our state so that they can know how to actually extract value from this technology. I think this is something we should do and something that we could all get behind. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phaedra. We'll keep you up here. And Charles, why don't we bring you up on stage? And we're going to answer a couple of audience questions. But as you're making your way up, why don't we go ahead and look at the response to the polling question we asked our audience. So just as a reminder, the question was, should we be integrating AI into more of our energy infrastructure? And here are your responses. Okay, so it looks like we have an overwhelming majority that said yes, but we should integrate it slowly. Oh, it's easier to see it on the big screen, actually. And then, but more than a quarter of us are saying, no, we don't know anything about its impact. And then Phaedra, just based on what I heard you say, maybe it's yes, but maybe it's let's think about ethics, accountability, literacy, and all that's needed to do it the right way. And so, but you can challenge me on that if I got anything wrong. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive into some Q&A, and please go ahead and send those questions in. Let me just do a quick refresh here. So Charles, let's start with you. You spoke about 3 potential ways AI could help us. Is there anything about AI that keeps you up at night, and what's being done about what you're worried about?
Well, I think to that question and also to the poll, when we use the word AI, it's a very, very broad term. I don't think anyone is really proposing that ChatGPT run the power grid. And the kinds of AI that we're going to need are going to be very different, I think, than what all of us might imagine initially, and certainly different than ChatGPT. So what kind of keeps me up at night is that we might have a very overly narrow perception or conception of what AI might look like, and that becomes the focus of corporate procurement solutions, for instance. There are a number of smaller companies that are using different kinds of AI models for the grid that look very different, and I think we need to make sure we're thinking about the entire portfolio of different AI solutions rather than just the ones that the biggest companies are talking about that might not even be right for this kind of application. I think that's something I always try to talk about or clarify, at least when talking about these conversations.
Okay. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree. I think, as I said in my talk, that making sure that there are structures, safeguard rails, in particular with respect to accountability and transparency to communities that would benefit from these grids, I think are going to be critical.
Phaedra, I'm going to start with you with this next question, but we talked about bias. How do you go about auditing for bias? And what do those of us in the room, what can we do to sort of understand it more and make decisions?
There's actually different forms of bias. First of all, my favorite definition of the word data is that it is an artifact of the human experience. And I'm saying this because we humans, we generate the data, or we make the machines that generate the data, but we do have over 188 biases and counting. So what's truly interesting about AI is that it acts as a mirror that reflects our biases back to us. And we just have to be introspective enough and brave enough to look into the mirror and decide, does this actually align with my values? If it does align, be transparent about why did you pick this data? Why did you think this data was so important? Why this methodology? If it doesn't align, that's when you know you need to change. But there's different forms of bias. There's when it comes to AI, there's data bias, there's decision bias, there's outcome bias, and basically there's different ways of being able to approach auditing for unwanted bias given the 3.
Okay, so there's tools out there, there's different methodologies
That's
out
right.
there. And if we had some more literacy programs and training, and maybe a center for excellence, we'd all have those skills a lot sooner.
Exactly. The literacy is absolutely key, yes.
So what hopes do you have for AI, and what will it take to realize those hopes?
Well, I think I'll echo Phaedra's point. I think having centers for excellence at state universities is a really great idea. We've seen a number of states, I think most prominently New York's Empire AI initiative, where they have committed a significant amount of public funding and philanthropic funding to actually build data centers at universities that are able to run AI models that public researchers, scientists can actually use to develop AI for good. I think that kind of initiative is really exciting to see and can really help address a lot of the issues that we've been talking about here.
And one of you mentioned smaller models of AI that take less energy. Is that something that we're going to see soon come our way? Or is it already
It's here. It is already here. In fact, this is basically forms the basis of IBM's enterprise strategy when it comes to AI, is this idea of helping organizations train and curate their own AI. But what I would love to see, per your prior question, is really bringing this to others who could themselves determine what are the trusted sources of data. For example, bring the power back to librarians to determine which ones of these are trusted for domains that are of interest to them. One of the misconceptions that I'm seeing in the market is that true experts in their domain don't believe that they even have a seat at the table when it comes to AI, because their perception is, I don't have a degree in machine learning or data science. I don't have a PhD in AI. Why do I belong here? Mm-hmm. And they don't realize how important it is to have someone who's a domain expert who not only understands the data better than anyone else, but the context of how that data was even gathered, whether it was gathered with consent, the relationships between the data. You're going to need those kinds of domain experts in order to be able to responsibly curate the tech.
Okay, so did y'all hear that? Okay. So, and we actually have a librarian on our team, so I hope they heard that. So last question, and I'm picking among many here, so I'm going to send these to both of you, and if you have time, hopefully you'll have a chance to respond. But mentioned earlier, we're doing a 3-year series on infrastructure. Our next forum is going to be focusing on water. So how can, if either of you can respond to this, how can AI use be applied to reduce water use or pressures related to large data centers and different types of energy production, but focusing on that water use as well?
Yeah, I think certainly that is always kind of the under-discussed aspect of data center development. Not only do they use a lot of energy, they use a lot of water. The Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Lab had a big national data center report that came out in December, I believe. And a lot of the headlines focused on the energy consumption, but they actually do have a lot of work on water consumption as well and the different types of cooling systems. I think that's another area where we need to see a lot of investment and innovation, because there are a wide variety of cooling technologies that use different amounts of energy and different amounts of water. And it's one where I don't think we have a clear solution yet. And that's, I think, a good space for greater public investment, perhaps, in R&D innovation.
Okay. Anything else to add?
From what I understand, out of the European Commission, there were conversations about Scandinavian countries in particular researching new forms of cooling. And in particular, they were looking at what you could do with briny water, even salt water, in order to help cool down data centers. So we'll see.
We know a little something about salt water here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Well, any closing thoughts before we end our remarks here?
Only that it's an exciting time, I think, to be in the space. There's a lot of, I think one might even say, misinformation about how AI could be used or can be used or what it might look like. But I think the more you dig into it, the more there's actually a lot to uncover about the different opportunities.
My closing thought would again be to underscore the importance of AI literacy in the way that I've described it. And what it is going to take is truly a multidisciplinary approach towards teaching the trade. So not just teaching the subject of data and AI in a comp sci class or a school of engineering, but truly having it be interdisciplinary. And why not bringing it in earlier into people's academic careers, like middle school and high school, and teach it in social studies class? Perhaps that is where it best belongs.
So very interesting thoughts. So thank you both for being here today and helping us think through AI in a new way. So thank you both very much, Phaedra and
Thank you.
Charles. We appreciate it.